last time how we can basically hit endpoints on our app, which is good, and probably that would be sufficient, I think, to do any kind of communication with your ship, just like call dynamic endpoints and have it do stuff. But it's sufficient only in the sense of like in computers, like everything is the same as everything else in programming. If it's like Turing complete, you can like make anything do anything, but the details matter a lot. So there is like sort of a cleaner way to get stuff into and out of your server, and also to provide some kind of sanity and like typing for the stuff that comes in and out. Okay, so there's basically it's ways to like create stuff on your front end, like JSON objects, for example, that translate directly into the objects that you have on your back end.
Okay.
And I think people get the wrong idea about how, and I definitely got the wrong idea about it initially in terms of how much ceremony there is here. The only dependency for this stuff is the channel.js library, which is like about 230 lines of code. And that lets you do everything in terms of poking your ship and subscribing to its updates.
Okay.
Okay, and that's included with every distribution right now. When I say it's included, I mean that if we go to like under app landscape JS, it always comes with channel.js.
Okay.
Okay, and that looks like this right now. Let's see how long it is. I don't think it's been rewritten. Yeah, 244 lines now, so maybe a tiny bit of stuff added, but conceptually, it really just does two things. One, it opens like a WebSocket or an event. I guess this one is an event source that is basically something like you can, yeah, this thing here. We basically make an event source and attach a function to it that says whenever a new message comes on this event source, fire a function.
Okay.
Okay, so that's how we listen to the ship. And then it pokes the ship, which is it hits a specific air endpoint that's like already sort of defined in the operating system, and it'll translate any data that comes in on that endpoint.
And do you have to build your front end to tell that channel.js which Gall app it's trying to poke?
Yes, and we'll look at that, and
Okay.
we'll actually go ahead and poke the stuff.
Okay.
Okay, so what we need to do to start this off is let's see the example code. Oh yeah.
One more thing while you're getting that set up. Are you? I assume that you are not using the like example Gall app distribution that they had that allows you to build the stuff.
Correct. So you definitely could use that. What I'm trying to show in this lesson is kind of the bare bones version of how to do it. Because this bare bones version, if you know how to do it, you can use with any front end framework or any way of, even doing it within React. And so you're kind of not
Mm.
dependent on the landscape infrastructure, which
No, I
I
like
think is
that.
nice. I mean, I even have,
Yeah.
like, for example, I've been playing around a lot lately with this is like just like a quite beautiful framework like Svelte. Essentially, the difference between it and React or something is that React and all of those they have like a big runtime that interprets your code on the fly, whereas Svelte like compiles everything into normal JavaScript, so it's a lot smaller and faster. And also, it's like kind of cool to read and write. Like it basically parse. So what it lets them do is it lets them make these kind of weird files. Like I can probably find like an easy example right here, but it lets them make these weird files that have like script tags, style tags, and script tags, style tags, and then just like your kind of normal HTML. And it
Oh.
basically turns all of these into like it basically takes the HTML components and turns them into a nodes that it attaches. It compiles the style into a bit like CSS file and namespaces it. So if I use like for example, like any names I use here won't conflict with names in another. in another file. So there's anyway. Long story short is that this is like a fun, nice framework to use, and like through this like course or this lesson, you'll see how you could just plug your Gall interactions into that,
Okay.
or you could plug them into React very, very straightforwardly. So I just want to give people like kind of a sense of freedom in terms of interacting with just JavaScript hitting an orbit server,
Cool.
because it is pretty straightforward. Okay, so what we're gonna do in order to start this, I need to do a little like commit home. All right, so got all those, and we're gonna start Chanel. Um, so that's like going now. It works. I debugged it prior. So
When you
in terms of what
committed
this
it
does, it
five
uses
times, was it
file.
Chanel number 5? I'm sorry. I had to.
There we go.
Anyway.
There we go. Like it's I can actually, yeah, I can ask. Right now it's Chanel number 3.
Okay. Well, they had to go
For
through other
Zoc.
iterations first, so that makes sense.
It will be soon. So you can like, yeah, exactly. You can watch for that moment to happen.
Okay.
Um, so we get here. So notice that in our on init, we do a file server action to serve that directory,
Okay.
and we're going to serve it from app/Chanel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't even know why I put a counter in the state here. I think I just literally had a dummy variable in there, so I would have a state, and then I never replaced it. So nothing magical there.
Okay.
Sometimes I just do that when I'm writing apps. I just put something there so it's there. I guess I could just have it be null. Would also make a lot of sense. Possibly even more sense. So then we also get this thing here where we want to poke in our on init. Wait, I'm going crazy. Okay, yeah, we poke file server with that action. Okay, so we're going to serve up that directory, and then we have debug, which we've already talked about. Okay, so we do use marks a lot here because when you pass data from the front end to your program, you can either pass it as like raw JSON, or you can pass it as a mark you define that parses JSON.
Oh,
Okay, so
okay.
either way, JSON is going to be coming in from channel.js. It's just the way it's implemented. Um, but you get the option of like using your own mark to do that. Okay, so we do that up here in mark action. So notice there's like a little bit more going on in this mark than we've seen in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we'll go through like all of this and what it's doing. Before we get to that, we actually have to look at like how JSON parsing works. And as I go through here, I just need to change some like minor typos that come up. There's a period. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna use like all the arms found in like DJS format, which is in zoos.hoon. So have you looked at any of this before?
I have, but I didn't. I was, as you call it, cargo culting what I was using there.
Okay.
I didn't really understand what I was doing. I mean,
Okay, so
sort of understood, but not really.
yeah, we're gonna go like kind of gently here, and try to get a better idea of what's going on. So first, let's find this DJS arm. So it's under if we go up to where it's under format, and it does describe what's happening in each of these. Some of them are a little bit annoying to follow. Some of them are a lot more straightforward. Okay, what it does is it has two different. So it's arms. Let us create gates that will parse JSON.
Okay.
Okay, and so there's two basic types. There's arms that directly have that just are gates like so and knee. Okay, so for example, just knee. If we look at like I'll show you knee here is just number as an integer. Okay, so it's basically gonna take some like number going in and parse it as an integer, a JSON number.
Okay.
And notice that this is just a gate, and furthermore, it's a gate that takes JSON.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So and we can just walk through, and some of the stuff we're dealing with. Do you know kind of the old Hoon syntax with like
Yeah.
buck and stuff? So, yeah, okay. So this is just like, it starts off with just like a straightforward pattern match, which is, it says it has to be a tuple where the first thing is like, the term n, right?
Right. And then any noun.
Yeah. So we already know it's JSON because it's coming in, but then it says that it has to also start with the term n, and this is because Hoon JSON, like the Hoon JSON type, it looks kind of like, this should work.
Oh, so it's
Yeah.
literally the type. Okay. Okay. Right. I didn't know if in was a type that was defined somewhere else, but it's like sen in.
Yeah, exactly. So it's basically part of the JSON type. And in fact, we could probably, if we go back and look for the JSON type, JSON request, where was
Would it be in
maybe
here
it's
or would
in,
it be in?
it might be in Hoon.Hoon. I know, is that like kind of fundamental. Um, there it is, JSON value. So you can see that it's basically, and interesting, we
Oh,
see
there's
that
a couple types. Okay.
they're actually, that numbers are actually knots. So we wouldn't just want to write the number. We would want to write the number like this, like as a knot, or a chord is even more general. So that's fine.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So, but we're just getting to the thing, or it can have like, so basically it can be array, Boolean, object, number, or string.
I think I
This
was
is just
dealing
the
with
the
strings, so
JSON stuff.
yeah. Okay, but yes.
Exactly. So what we're gonna do in the course of this part of the lesson, is we're just gonna get comfortable with everything,
Cool.
like not just strings. Okay. So, and again, notice Boolean is just a Boolean value right here. So actually, if we're gonna make like a Boolean, this should be like valid. Yeah. So it likes that, whereas it shouldn't, like if I just do something like this. Yeah, that's an idea.
Okay.
Okay, so it's enforcing just what all these are. Then objects. So JSON objects are just maps of chords to JSON. Okay,
Okay.
which makes sense. That's how JSON, like, so JSON objects are really just what in Hoon are maps. Have you looked at JSON much? Or have you seen it?
Like I say, for this app that we built for that hackathon, yes, but not. I didn't really understand what I was doing. But that JSON map there would be chords to further specified JSON objects. Is that right?
Exactly. The chords that map to like inside JSON objects, which could themselves be objects, or they could be numbers,
Yes.
strings,
Yes.
right?
Okay.
Arrays. And like, here's an example of like, so JSON is just this thing that nests as much as you want.
Right.
And valid JSON is, well, valid JSON is any of these things. It can be an array, a Boolean, an object, a number, a string. And so this is one is, so at the top level, it's an object with key glossary.
Hmm.
Object just being a map, and then that has like, one element, and well, it has one element which is another map with the key title, and it goes, kind of nest down as far as you want, and eventually it has some here where the JSON element is an array, or here it's a string. None of them are numbers here, but yeah.
But we could
Or here's some
imagine
more.
also a Boolean or whatever. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. In fact, we should probably. And here's an example of. And notice the Boolean doesn't need quotes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Or the numbers. This is an interesting thing. So in JSON format, these things don't need quotes like the numbers, but when they're sort of put into this Hoon JSON format and parsed into it, they do take on, like, they sort of become strings or chords.
I like the idea of the JSON object being a map of potentially further maps. That's very helpful for me from the
Yeah.
outside
So
perspective.
and we'll definitely see that, just because like the kind of object or map structure is just such a big part of JSON. Like, even when you look at this sample file we have here, it has all these examples of like, here's our key, and then it has another map. It's the value is yet another map with its own keys.
Okay. Okay. Yes.
So you can nest these indefinitely, and in fact you often do, because like very often you'll have some, object that itself has a lot of properties.
Yeah.
So the key like kind of little takeaway as we go back to zoos and DJS is that there's these kind of basic parsers. Okay, so this thing is a gate that takes a JSON, and it validates first that it's like the right type of JSON to be working with, and then it takes the thing in that chord. Remember how if we look back over
Hmm.
here, a number was a not,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? And so it goes and gets that p value, and it actually has to do this pattern match to ensure the p value is there.
Right. Right. That
Actually, is
puts
that
it in the.
true? Is that
I
true?
think so because
Actually,
it puts it
oh
in the
yeah, it
null,
does
right?
because it could. Yeah, because it could be a null,
Yeah.
right? So otherwise, it doesn't. If it wasn't for that, it actually could just directly access it because there's no other option. But because of that null possibility for the JSON, like so you can have that is valid. It has to check that, so it does that pattern match, and then it does rash, which basically just means parse this whole chord, this whole knot or chord using this parser.
Okay.
And dem is just a parser for decimals.
And so theoretically, we
So,
could write our own parsers if we wanted
in
to.
fact, you could, yes.
Okay.
Wait, that should work. This is
Single quote.
yeah, that's probably why. 'Cause I can't take a tape. Yeah, there we go. Good job, university. Um, Killing it with the no, it's good. It's good. I don't spend enough time doing like tapes are like definitely different than chords.
Yeah.
That is a true thing. But everyone, if I do my little knot, everyone can suck it. So you can edit that
Suck
out.
your knot. Got it.
Okay. Um, so yeah, you could write your own parser or use custom ones.
Okay.
I could probably I bet we're gonna get a little funky because I do want to do this parser lesson later, but I bet we could do prefix sig dem and like something like this. It's not gonna oh right. Isn't it like sig?
Did you
No,
say
mix
dem or
sig, right?
dev?
Dem. I'm just thinking. There we go. That worked.
Nice.
Okay, so what I don't know if you've done parser, making
No.
parser, but basically you can. Yeah, so essentially, just as because we will see that a little bit more in a sec. Um, like this mixig lets you build parsers. It's worth doing a lesson. In fact, I should just make a note now to like kind of get that going. Because I think a kind of parsing lesson would be valuable to have. Okay, so pretty much right there. So that's doing that, and it's just it parses it into a number because what it told us at the end that it would give us a number as an integer,
Hmm.
right? Whereas no tells us that it'll give us a number as a chord, so it does like exactly the same code, just written in a little bit of a shorter line, and just goes ahead and returns the chord.
There's a lot of these. Okay, so a lot of it's already built for us.
A lot, in fact, most of what you would want is built for you, and this kind of pattern we're going to use to parse objects is very predictable. So we can just look at these examples here. So and I'm just trying to emphasize that you can look in like the djs
Hmm.
library just so for it to tell. It's pretty well documented.
Yeah, more than most things in. I
Yeah,
shouldn't say that. Yeah.
Zoos is decently documented. There's just a lot of parts of Hoon.Hoon that are going to need to be gone over. So here's string as chord, right? Or we can even parse a string using some kind of rule. So that would be like first get a string out of like JSON, right? So here it checks for it to be in string form,
Hmm.
and then it goes and runs the parsing rule passed on it.
Oh. Oh, that's interesting.
Let me so what that right so what that would mean is notice up here we were kind of like parsing numbers, so we were saying so I'll just go and show that's Sue. So and this one we were parsing like like a number,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
um but this one is like, no, it's cool, you can take something that it's a string, and after you like treat it as a string, go ahead and then parse it into something else.
Okay. What
Okay.
what is sub? Sorry.
Sab is of type rule, and rule is a type that can like basically rules are parsers. They can take in strings and spit out various like parsing information.
Okay, so you're passing into Sue first the rule, and then okay.
Yes, Now, notice here I said there's kind of two types of arms: arms that produce gates and arms that require
Ah,
samples to produce gates.
yeah.
Sue is one of these that requires a rule sample to produce a gate.
Okay, got it. Sorry.
Okay, or here, no, no, totally. Or up here, C or se takes an aura as a term, like send p or something for ship,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
parses like in that format. So that's also pretty clear how that would look. That would be like I don't have an example. There's C djs format, and then we just pass in some JSON string, which could be like we just do like a ship name
Yeah.
randomly chosen. And this would be as a string. So sorry, these would be chords. This live coding should work. Um, and we say the first argument to the sample to say is a term that represents an aura.
Which could be like Pat P, or
Exactly. A
so
term.
ship, I
Well,
guess.
it has to be a term. Exactly. So it'd be like this, and it doesn't like what I'm doing. I guess the first thing to kind of debug that is I should. Okay, so we just make sure. Yeah, so that part works, and then it checks whether this thing is JSON. Or
What does
sorry,
wonk
because
do?
that's not using wonk
Oh,
though.
okay.
It's
I was
in
looking at the wrong one.
yeah. So, I mean, this should just work, which is Slav. Oh, maybe does it? I'm trying to remember if it requires it. Oh, I know. Or maybe it has to take off the. No, that works. Yeah. So the whole thing should.
Do you have to request
Oh
P from the?
no! I know what it is. Okay, so this is actually something we're going to see coming up when we look at parsers with samples. Notice that it looks. I actually have a C example right here.
Oh.
Um, so notice that it closes it, and that's because the sample, the gate, only takes one element
Uh
in the
huh.
sample,
Uh huh.
and then that further produces the gate. Yeah, pretty sure. So what we do is we just have to first run this, and then it'll run it on the result.
That's a pretty
It'll
goofy
get.
construction. Why did they choose to do that?
There's a very good reason for it, and we'll
Okay.
see it in a sec. So this does work, and we could cast it to an Pat P, and
Yeah.
notice
Yeah.
that it works. The reason for this goofy construction is that once we pass this thing here, this is now a JSON parser. Okay, it's a gate, and that's because once we pass it send p right here, it returns a gate. So now by passing it send p, we've now created a parser, just as knee is a parser, for example.
Okay.
We've created something like this. So I think you've seen a lot kind of higher order functions, which are just functions, or um let me think of a better way to say this. Basically, all this, the way to think of this is that se and some of these other ones, all of these ones that have double gates, whether they're wet or dry, like op has it,
Yeah.
has it. We'll look at a few others. Oh, tons of them have it. Okay, so basically, all of these things, they're like parser factories. So it takes some sample, and from that it produces a parser.
I think I get that because if you made a cell input for a normal gate, then you'd have to have some extra code that would make a parser within that gate, and then you'd apply that parser that you just made to it. But this way, they're just immediately making the parser gate, and then
Yeah,
okay,
it's like if you have a situation in which you need a parser, like the thing you need to produce is a parser, then you want this rather than having two arguments, because then you wouldn't have a way to just produce a parser that works for all send p's.
okay,
Like
I think I
this is
get
a
that.
more general case. Like we notice here we want a parser for DAs.
Right.
Right, and so it would just be stupid to have to define 100 versions of this gate for every possible aura.
Okay. All right.
Right, so we just define it once, and then whenever we need a parser that parses strings, we just call up that parser factory and do
Okay.
it. Okay, so actually I have a couple examples of it here. So here's the Pat P version. here's one. So notice how we can just tell it like that we wanted to do these things, and we only had to write one SC function.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
Okay, that's the win there, and it's a pretty big win. Um, and then here's parse string for using a rule. There's a lot of different ways you can do this, but the kind of the advantage here is that if we're getting our ship name just as like a chord without the sig on the front, we wouldn't be able to use this thing here, right?
Hmm. Let me see. Okay.
Because this is expecting a chord that starts with a sig.
Ah. Yes. Yes. Okay. I track.
And we would get an error if we did that. So now we're basically like, damn, I want a parser that handles this situation. Okay, and so Sue, what it lets us do is it lets us pass. So this one only lets us pass auras, but this thing basically lets us make up like kind of any kind of rule.
Okay. And in this case, your
So
rule was
someone
that fed.
is fed ag, which is basically just like take something that's like a chord that represents a ship name but has no sig and parse it appropriately.
Does it handle the case of having the sig too, so that you could do like it doesn't matter what
Uh,
user puts their
yeah,
stuff in
good
as.
question. That's that's a good question. I think the answer is no, but it also let's check. Although if the answer is okay, yeah, so it doesn't
Huh.
work. This one is actually the parser throwing the errors. The parsers have a certain format they throw errors in.
Okay.
And the error is basically it says it happens in the first line in the first character, which is essentially like
There
I
we go.
wasn't expecting a sig here. I
Right.
wasn't expecting a sig. Um, if we want to get a little parsy, we can look for fed. Should be fed in AG. Yeah. It looks like it's doing a lot, and it kind of is, but planet or moon. So when it returns like uses Hoff. Oh, Hoff AB. Oh, AB. I see. Right. Right. Interesting. So yeah, these are like this gets into a lot of detail that we probably don't want to do, but these are like various parsers for ships and planets and stuff like that.
Okay.
Um, so but the point is that it's like a custom thing that doesn't rely on how, SendP does stuff.
Got it.
So the other answer though is that on the front end in like JavaScript, you tend to have these ship names without the sig.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so another way even of saying that is that this thing, um, I wonder if oh right, it should be. I'm gonna find out where this thing lives. Yeah, landscape.js session.js. Oh right, sorry, it's gonna be JS. Yeah. Okay. So there's this
Okay.
kind of auto-generated JavaScript file once you log in called session.js, and it returns things as this, and that kind of stays constant on the front end
Makes
on
sense.
JavaScript return. So that's the reason. Obviously, it's like a little bit of a weird parser, and you have to kind of dig to find it, but it comes up so often that it's fine to just memorize it. Everything else you can kind of just parse normally using normal string parsing or number parsing. It's
Okay.
just this one fed AG. Okay. So that's kind of parsing easy stuff, like kind of parsing these like atomic entities, like strings, numbers, ship names, stuff like that, right?
All right.
Then sometimes you also want to parse like objects, like we've seen here, right? So we might want to take something like this and convert it to some kind of Hoon data structure.
Like a map.
Yeah, it could easily be a map, or imagine something like if we go to mm, I mean, imagine we have something like this, and we want to say
Oh
like
yeah.
like
Okay.
imagine we have something a map whose key is example. Like I'll just type it here and then we'll delete it. But we could easily imagine having something like this example who and so forth.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
Right. So we could very easily imagine something like this, right? And we want to basically parse this object into this coon, like not list, like the cell
Yeah. Yeah.
tuple,
Okay.
right? And that's such a common case. In fact, most of the time when you're doing JavaScript parsing, although those are the only reason, but a lot of the time when you're doing JavaScript parsing from the front end, it's in order to turn these kind of actions into pokes
Right. That makes sense.
or into some kind of data structure. Like imagine if one of these elements was a more complex data structure,
Okay.
and you would then have a way to parse like the JSON object into it.
And that would be like the case of a JSON object that has a JSON object nested as one of its elements and that sort of thing on down the line. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Or even this, like, yeah, totally. I'll just exactly. So let's look at. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna set up some kind of example maps, and I'll show you what they have, just so that we can see all this. So here's map one, which is just like we take up a blank map of core to JSON.
Yep. Okay.
And the reason we're doing maps of core to JSON is because that's what a JSON object is,
Makes sense.
right? So basically, I take this M1, and it's going to be key. It's just going to be this tuple. So we're going to put in our key as key one, and then the thing is this JSON value s sample chord. Okay.
Yep.
So we can just put both each of these in. Okay, and put this in, and then we'll make one that's like M both is just so we have M1, M2, and then this one is like it has all the keys. Just a map, chord, JSON, M both. It has key two goes to its like JSON value,
Got
and
it.
then key one going to its JSON value. Just to show we have that. So we have two main things for parsing. Um, and you can go more in depth with JSON parsing because there are more of these like O gates. But the two really basic ones that just get used over and over are OF and OT. Okay.
Okay.
So OF, let me look at our example because I use it in MAR. Um, it takes so its only argument that it takes is a list.
Okay.
Okay, and what the list is a list of key parser tuples.
Oh, interesting.
So okay, so here let's be concrete about that. So here's OF.
Mhm.
So we're just calling the gate OF, and it's going to produce a parser at the end. Okay.
Mhm.
And the way and what it takes is its sample in order to produce that parser is a list of key, which are terms, and then parsers.
Yes, I see what you're doing. Okay.
Now, what do these correspond to? The first one corresponds to I'm expecting to see. It basically means like if your thing is this map that has the key increase counter,
Mhm.
and then I can parse the value of the map to something of type of parse using parser counter, then I'll match this.
Right. Right.
So parser counter is actually we'll look at OT in a second, but essentially it runs this parser and it tries to like make it work. Okay, if that doesn't work, um, it goes and does the next one. I just did this as an example. We remember this like lust syntax. This
Yes.
is like the same as this, just to show you. You will see this once in a while. I think it's a little cuter than is necessary. It doesn't really make sense here, but whatever. People do it sometimes, so good to see. Same here, example, and then send subdata. And these are all just arbitrary names of parsers.
Right. Right. And then the
Okay,
parser,
and
you've drafted those parsers below, though, right? Like, I mean, not the
yes,
OT part, but
correct. I've drafted them, but it does bottom out at some point. So you could absolutely, for example, this thing instead of being the counter custom parser, I could just make it like this
yes.
and say
Okay.
parse a number, and then that would be expecting like this situation.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay. Whereas when I do this custom thing, as we're about to see in a second, it's actually expecting a different situation, which is I say parse the use the counter parser, and the counter parser actually expects something that looks like this:
Which is its own object.
step and a number.
Okay.
Its own object with the value as a number.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the difference. And I also want to show you can reuse these parsers, which I guess it's obvious you can reuse them because we see down here like the part like the so parser getting reused a lot.
Yeah.
Um, but I can be even a little bit more specific about that. Right, wrong. Oh, right. Hmm? Did I put these in? Did I put the parser in Sir? I'm just trying to remember how I did. Yeah, I used this new one where I put the part. Okay, so you can put the parser in the mark. I've also started sometimes putting it in lib. Doesn't really matter. But this one here, I have this parser called resource, which parses an entity and a name, and I use that in like multiple places here. That's all I mean.
Mm.
Okay. Let's stay with this example though, because it's a little bit simpler. Um, okay, so let's continue then with OT because it's hard to explain everything. So actually, here's OF. So I first make an OF parser. So it takes OF and then it says match me either key one or key two. So find an object that either has the key one or an object that has the key two.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. I actually want to test something out here in 1 second, but first let's make this OF parser. Okay. So we have the OF parser, and now we just say OF parser run on this JSON.
Let me think
So
about that.
you can remember how we said that one of the JSON types is object, and then a map of chord to JSON.
Right, and we made map up. Okay.
We
Right.
made map one be a map of chord to JSON.
Yep.
Just there's zero magic here. We're just kind of working through those types. So we're like, all right, we have some legit JSON here. OF parser parsing, and it does.
Okay.
Now I'm actually interested in whether it can parse them both. Yeah, it doesn't. Okay, we're going to talk about in a sec why it doesn't like that. And then again, here we can run it on this other M2, and it likes it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, one thing to note about OF is it expects it expects to get an object, a JSON object, and it expects that object to only have one key.
How are you supposed to do that?
No, an object with just one key is our M1 is an object with just one key.
Oh, I guess like going back to the glossary example, if you were building a very complex object in your front end, you'd have one key at the top and it could have many, many things underneath. Okay.
Exactly. So the way that usually looks in these things, and because it's such a common pattern, I'll just like extract it and show it. Is like because the reason you end up with a situation so often with these like one key maps is because of the tagged union type in Hoon. Okay, so
Yeah.
those basically correspond to tagged unions. So here's tagged union of increase counter, decrease counter, example, send sub data, and we can just like recreate that situation by making JSON objects that have only one top level key, which is the like tag and the tagged union.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so and
Yes,
we're
it
basically
does.
saying, we're basically saying pass this thing to a tagged union, and in fact, notice all the way up here, we actually are running the action We're this is a mold,
Running it on the incoming JSON.
right? So action is coming from here from Chanel.hood in Sir, and so its action is this like tagged union, and so we're actually running that on the type. I think this should work also if we like just do it as a cast. I think that should work fine, but I had just seen it like this, so I like yanked it. But it should work just as a cast also because that's equivalent.
Okay, weird question. Why do you have the SIR file that has the action arm or action type
Hmm.
there, and then we have this action arm underneath. Is that standard protocol to have like that Tizgal and then a core that has action underneath it, or Do you know what I'm saying?
There's yeah, I get what you're saying. Action. Oh, right. So I'm reusing the name action right
Yeah, and
there.
using Tisgal to make it
Yeah,
first in the
yeah, yeah,
subject.
yeah. I just saw it and yanked it. There's sort of there's nothing special about any of
Okay.
this.
It's not
Honestly,
looking for
probably
that because you have to call it in. Okay.
no, nothing here is. Yeah, that's a good question. But the only magical thing here is the word grab,
Mm-hmm.
or rather, the only thing that's like used outside. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways you could do this. In fact, if you're just saying we just want to have a gate that takes this JSON and turns it into an action channel, I mean, you could just start by running this like parser by basically getting this parser and
Mm-hmm.
then running it on the JSON would be totally legit.
Okay. I think I get that. Yeah.
Yeah, and also, I mean, honestly, as I look at this, it probably would work really well as a barcat also. Like
Yes.
you could easily run it as so. There's a lot of ways to do it. This one is pretty commonly used, and I guess you get this thing where the action like word doesn't overwrite any like this doesn't overwrite anything because it's the first thing in scope because of this core. And then we've already used this one before the core is defined. So it doesn't have any name conflict issues. But you're right that using the same word like that too often could create issues.
Yeah, it's just hard to read for me. But I see what you're doing now.
Yeah, exactly. It probably could be written a little bit better. Interesting notice here that they do have to like kind of reference the JSON name one above because, and this
Right.
one there's no way around that because the grab arm does have to correspond to like a mark.
Wait, and so the JSON that they're referencing above is from a
Is the
format.
mold is the mold from like Hoon that we looked at.
Okay. Yes. All right. All right. Very good.
Yeah. Ooh, all
It's from
right. So
format,
let me just
right?
check
Or
this.
no? Or no? It doesn't have to
Yes.
be from format. I guess it could be from. I see what I see.
All
It could be from
right.
anything that's in the subject by default.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Oh, nice. Finally, just got my son's passport came out.
Nice.
Maybe can travel someday again. Took like yeah. Anyway, long story. Like getting it on this like Caribbean island, so I had to go through
Once
their
the
processes and like
once the pandemic's done, right? Right.
yeah, exactly. Well, actually, like yeah, Turkey is open, and there's a few other countries that are
Oh,
open. It's
cool.
actually not that. Yeah, we're like closed. Well, so Ukraine is closed for foreigners, but residents or citizens can go in and out. So actually, we could travel, but there's like this other complication where. Anyway, this isn't good radio, so I'll explain
Yeah.
stuff
No,
later.
it's fine.
Okay, yeah, I just want this to be like an actual product at the end, so I'll edit it out. Okay, but I think that's like pretty clear here. One other thing I want to say. So we've motivated why OF is useful because of the tag union pattern. It's useful to have these like one key things.
Yes.
And if you try to do two keys with OF, it will throw an error.
Right. Yes. Okay.
Okay, and so that's good. It means that we can kind of use OF cleanly to map the tag fields.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, and then our only job is basically to like kind of parse the data inside this object appropriately so that all the fields in the tag union match up.
And do would we need all? No, we wouldn't need all of them because we could just do. This one only has an increase counter and an example, but the next one that's coming in has a decrease and a send sub data or whatever.
Exactly. So essentially, it's just a list of
Yep.
your
Yep.
tag union types.
Okay.
There's other ways you could use it besides tag unions, but that's like just so idiomatic that we should just think of it for that for now, and then you can expand later.
Got it.
Um, OT. This is in contrast to tag union. This basically handles the tuple case, which is another really common Hoon pattern, which is basically the rest of the thing here is a tuple.
Okay.
So it's the tag union that then has like a cell with like multiple faces.
Mhm.
So the best way
Mhm.
to think of OT is that it handles faces.
Okay.
So OF is for distinguishing between the different options for a tagged union, and OT is for once you've like distinguished them, then going in for anytime you have this like multiple faces situation, kind of yanking out all those faces, parsing their values, and then assigning them to a face.
Yes, okay, I see this over here with example going to the example arm that then has the, and then it just turns
And
it back
the
into a
example
tagged
is
union.
just yeah, exactly. So we noticed that well, no, it's not. Yeah, exactly. So
Cell.
let's exactly a cell. It's not a tagged union. So when this one, it basically meant alternate, like switch between these. Like these are different cases.
Yes.
For OT, it says build me a parser that gets all of these things.
Ah, so those are necessary then, in contrast.
Exactly. So this is an essentially this is an or and this is an and.
Interesting. Okay.
And also this one is interpreted as like essentially like a tuple or like I use tuple to mean like a cell with like multiple things,
Yeah, all of them
right?
are tuples, so yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, like
tuples all
just
the
like
way
an
down.
end. So it's a this is a four tuple.
Yeah,
Yeah, I want to say list, but I know it's not a list. So it's a tuple.
got it.
Um, so notice then that we do kind of bottom out here because each of these is just kind of a primitive type. Now, there's no reason they have to be. These could absolutely themselves be tagged unions that are parsed with OF or something like that. But we bottom it out here just for the example,
hmm hmm
right?
And it would get
But
obnoxious at a certain point.
yeah, exactly. But I mean, you could easily like there's no reason I couldn't do like OF and then something here and make some OF parser for like if at was itself a tagged union type, right? I can do it's fractal. I can repeat exactly the same thing,
That's very
like
interesting.
exactly. Yeah, and that's because you have to be able to handle this kind of like very nested
hmm
general JSON case, right? Where like we essentially have a tag, like a glossary key at the top with a title key, which is then so essentially we have two OFs at the top.
This might be able to allow you to steal content from, well, steal, to use content from external websites, even if it,
Yeah, absolutely. I
yeah,
mean,
okay.
that's yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So you can use Iris, like we saw last time, to call out to
Uh huh.
external websites and request their. And a lot of them have APIs that provide JSON, and this is how you would parse it.
Okay.
Which is so either you have the multiple key case or you have that. I think there is a parser for like optional keys. That doesn't come up so often in Hoon, so I haven't looked for it, but it's like it almost has to. I haven't looked at like object and units. Object is map. I'd have to like yeah. So there's a lot of different like stuff you can get into, but for writing Gall apps, this covers like so much of your cases, like basically all of it.
Yeah.
So I think we'll limit it to that and get comfortable with it, and then you can like kind of go further afterwards.
Okay.
Um, let me check one thing. Okay, so we will want to have some like some of the exercises in those lines. Um, okay, so cool, and then we can basically see we can actually do we make an OT parser for parsing the one that has both, and basically it says for key one parse it into a string, and key two parse it as a number.
Mm-hmm. And this will, yes, okay.
Okay, so we go ahead and do this, and then as expected, we're gonna. I mean, this is what'll happen if I type that in the dojo. It'll give me a sample chord, 99998.
Got it.
So notice that yeah. So this is actually kind of interesting because we mentioned the thing with the faces, and we'll show this in a sec. But we could then because this isn't a type, this like kind of chord thing here.
Mm-hmm.
Let me think of a way I could. If we made some kind of type that had like if we I won't define it now, but we could easily define a type that starts with a chord and ends with like a number and then assigns faces. And if we cast this thing as that, it would attach the faces to it.
Oh, okay.
So
So that
what
we
that
could
means
then
is that
extract them.
when we just run the OT parser on this example thing, it won't have the faces, but because we then cast it to action Chanel, it'll parse it and be like, oh, it's an example, and it'll add those faces on.
One other question there. Action. from the SIR file is also non-magic, right? Like we could have any number of potential, like we could call it JSON type and cast it
Yeah,
to that.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. And in fact, they often do have like some like different names. I just use action a lot.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to make sure I understood how that was working.
Yep, no magic. The only magic here is that this is grab inside the mark, and that these are the names of marks.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Okay.
Okay. And so actually, what's going to happen if you well, let's actually keep going and see how the JSON hits. So then we have arrays. So array of list. Um, list has one type inside, so we pass one parser. Meaning here we have our thing that makes the array parser. So we say, make me an array parser that expects numbers.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
And this thing is a JSON. Just this thing is a JSON array. Notice that it's
I see
tagged
it.
as an array. You can see it. It's a
Yeah.
list of JSONs. It's a list of JSONs.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay, so it says so then it'll parse that into the list of 910. Array as tuple is basically like parse something like this,
Yes.
right? Where it could be a tuple of like heterogeneous values.
And it
Okay, and so
comes
for
out
that
as
we
just a
need
cell. No, no null. It's not a list. It's really a cell.
exactly. It's really a cell. And notice that we again this thing defines our parser, and instead of just passing it one parser, we pass it a list of parsers.
Oh, very interesting. Does it need to be
Okay,
in
so
the
we're
order of the?
yes,
Okay.
yes. If I did not have it in those order, we would get an error.
Okay.
Okay, so it's a list of parsers in the order that it expects the things.
Yes.
And then here is array is set because all this parsing, we're trying to turn JSON into Hoon, right? And so over here with our fed AG, we're trying to turn strings into like legit ship names,
Uh
like
huh.
legit pat Bs. And so here, sometimes you like have in like JSON doesn't have the concept of set, but we can absolutely tell it, look, you're getting set, sorry, an array, but I want you to make it into a set. So here I go ahead and have my AS parser. I say expect a set of numbers
Yeah.
right. And so this one is I pass it a JSON array with a list of numbers, and I have
Mhm.
multiple tens in here.
Mhm.
But I say you're going to deal with it as a set, and so it does that, and it drops the extra 10.
Oh, that's weird. Okay. You'd think it would shit the bed if it, but a
No, there's
set
no.
doesn't care if you try and add a duplicative value to it. It just ignores it, huh?
It just drops it, and so you could even implement this parser yourself pretty easily by just doing AR and then running set of the type on it.
Yep. Yep.
Right, and I'm betting if I look in zoos and we look at AS, it probably just does that. Yeah, in fact, that's what it does. So it takes the A coming in, and gas in. I need to check what CU does, but essentially, it's taking the value and turning it into a set.
Mhm.
Okay. So now we actually that's like all the prelude, and now we can kind of get to like the real part and the fun part. Okay,
Okay.
which is kind of poking the ship. So in our on init for Chanel.hoon, we told it that this was like public. Okay, with
Mhm.
this thing here. So we should just be able to browse to it on localhost normally and without any yeah. So this does. We'll look at what all this stuff means, but it does work. Um, so the key thing is we're able to see the page without being logged in. I think I'm not logged into the ship yet. Oh, am I? Oh, I am. I should. Let's delete this. Actually, I should delete this ship and like let's see if you like it now. Yeah. So we're gonna like log out, copy it. Let's do commit. So okay. And this should still work. Yep.
Cool.
So that all works. Okay, and we'll look at what those messages in the console mean. Are you okay with working with dev tools in Chrome or in
Yeah. Yeah. Generally.
Okay, cool. Because It's really helpful
Good.
for this exact. It's because we can do a lot of kind of debugging messages, print them out to here, rather than like having to do weird stuff in the actual app itself. So it's just a convenience, and then you also can do stuff like, see what's getting passed over the network, which is actually kind of interesting, and we'll look at, and which we'll look at in a second. You can see any cookies that you have. So I'm going to delete our cookies right here so that we don't have any login ones. Okay, so back to the console. So if you open it and you go to this page, you'll see messages with our current. So notice that we're not logged in, but it's able to tell us our current ship name.
How does it?
Okay.
Is that for the
Or
ship
actually,
it's
sorry.
serving?
We weren't logged in when we did this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we're gonna need to actually. It's gonna like relog me in. And yes, this is from like the local Urbit ship.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Um. So, in index, so in our thing, we're serving this file index.html, and it's just a really simple skeleton file that includes the script channel.js and index.js. Now, you can get these from the landscape directory, or at least channel.js you can. I just, for the purposes of this like app, I just included it here as an example. And so that we could get it while we weren't logged in.
You can get this. You mean you could have that written into the landscape directory and then place it there?
So it's already in the landscape directory, but I also put a copy of it in our Chanel directory that we're serving publicly with file server, so that
Okay.
we would have access to it before we were logged in.
Okay.
Okay, just as an aside. So channel.js. I need to fix one typo here. So we're using like the May 28th version in this lesson, but there's a slightly more recent one. Okay, the way it works is that in your JavaScript, which is just so in that index.html, we included index.js.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that'll get run every time. In your JavaScript that you have, we create like a new channel. Okay, so this code gets included when the thing starts up, and it just goes ahead and runs first thing. So it makes a variable called window.urb and sets it equal to a new channel.
Okay.
Okay, so channel is just hold off like right now. All that channel is it's a JavaScript object that, and we can actually take a look at it. So we have our window.urb, and it'll show us like our things. It has a few different like functions attached to it. So one of them, it has subscribe, unsubscribe, and poke.
Okay. Sounds familiar.
Yeah, exactly. So it basically makes this object, connects it to air, and then that object, whenever we pass it in like a poke or something, it passes that message to air, which routes it to the correct like Gall app.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll look. So here, this documents the functions. We'll look at it at the end. But basically, the logical flow here is that poke or subscribe is called. You send the JSON to ship to this URL that'll look like ship channel, like ship being like localhost in this case,
Mm-hmm.
channel, and then some unique ID that it generates. And in fact, if we look at channel.js, just so none of this is magic, it has this function called channel URL, which just returns, sig channel plus this dot UID.
Okay.
And UID is literally how is it created? It's just a new date dot get time, turn it to a string, and then add on a random number.
Okay. Sure.
Okay, a random number to string, and then I think the slices take the back of it.
Is there no chance for overlap there? It seems. Oh,
That's
it's get time. It's not just the date. Okay.
yeah, exactly. So it's like you get the time, then you add a random thing.
All right.
So you're not gonna have collisions there.
Okay.
Or I guess you could. It's extremely unlikely, and it'll
Nobody's using your shit
somewhere.
anyway, so relax. I
Yeah.
get it. Yeah.
um, so, um, I actually want to like go down a little bit because it's like a little bit easier to like this explains like exactly the mechanics of how all this stuff works. But for live lesson, it's good to just look at what we do. So let's just walk through what our JavaScript does. We have a couple of functions defined here.
Mhm.
So actually
Mhm.
three functions. We won't look at them yet. We want to see what the code does. So first, define two passwords. This is not how you would do things normally. Okay, I just want to kind of show manually how you would do it because this is very similar to like airlock stuff. You could easily imagine instead of this password being stored in text, that it could be like entered into a box and like a password box and then passed into the JavaScript,
Mhm.
right? So this is the normal fake ship like code for Zod and timluc. And all my thing does is I actually wanted to just show for this thing that when we first open up this like page, we're not logged in and we have no idea what ship we're even on. So this code basically takes a crack at logging in to to a couple different like possible ships that we could be.
Oh, that's interesting.
Just kind of for fun. So what it does is it gets object.keys from passwords,
Yes. Okay.
which is just gets the Zod and timluc. For each, it passes in the name and runs like login for that password. Okay, so basically it tries to run the login function for the password.
Okay.
So what this one does then is, and this is actually kind of cool and worth looking at.
Oh, I
So
see.
what I'm going to look at first is let's delete our cookies. And so if we delete our cookies, I'm sharing the screen, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, cool. If I delete the cookies and we try to like kind of load the page, yeah, so it's not logged in and there's no cookies.
Yep.
Okay, so this will be the situation we're starting from. It fetches the page login using a post HTTP request, and it puts the body as password equals the password.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so this is very airlockish. This is basically us trying to hit this endpoint on our Urbit ship. Like with a post, and so what that'll do is if you hit it with the correct password, um, it'll actually set the cookie in your browser.
So the post where we have the body as password means act as if I interacted with the website with these changes.
Correct.
Okay.
And so what I so basically, well, basically it means go ahead and interact with the server and pass it this message.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's a better way of saying.
Okay,
Yes.
so what we're gonna do is actually if we refresh, we're actually gonna see it. I'm gonna clear the stuff here if I can. Yeah, and we're gonna see it hit the login endpoint up top if we refresh, and we're also gonna see that login endpoint. We should see. Okay, so here it is. Like this one here, and now notice that here's the request headers are what we sent to it.
Okay.
Okay, so
Yes.
we sent it some stuff. Here's our request payload password equal. This is what we sent. We said password
Yes.
equals body, right? And it should show that it's a post. General probably shows the method. Yep, request method is post. Request URL is this one. I'm in the network part of DevTools, just to be clear. Um, and then we see here that it actually returns that the server is Urbit of type Urbit.
Hmm.
So you actually can see that if you ping these like endpoints. To answer your question from last week,
Yeah.
it doesn't mask that currently, so you'll get banned for being like whatever kind of Nazi
Neo-reactionary
you are.
jerk. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But notice that it returns this response header: connection, date, server, and set cookie. So if you get a set cookie header back, this shows this is the key of the cookie and then the value.
Mm.
It's going to go ahead and set this like cookie right here.
Okay. And that's how it kept. That's how it. Jeez. That's how it kept coming back when you were loading this page because you
Exactly,
deleted it
because
a few
remember
times.
how we deleted the cookie a second
Yes,
ago. If we
yes.
go back here, we'll see that that exact cookie is set, and notice that it has this like value right now.
That's neat.
In fact, the same value is there. If we now remember that it ends in like RIEJR, we're
Hmm.
gonna delete it. We're gonna delete the cookie. Cookie is gone. We're gonna refresh, and our new cookie is actually like a totally fresh one.
Okay.
Okay, so you can't like do like the various like replay attacks if someone for whatever if someone watches this webcast and wants to hone
Mm.
my local host Zod, they
Hmm.
cannot do it.
They got another thing coming. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
You got him.
So again, notice how we haven't even looked at how to like poke the ship yet, and we're realistically you're actually not going to have to do that because most of the time you would just make your app not be public, and then if it didn't have, in fact, I mean, I wonder if that's worth showing because this is actually very. If our app wasn't public and we tried to go to that, all that's going to happen is it's going to be like, oh, sorry, you have to log in, right? And so then once
Mm.
we, right, so let's go ahead and start that. We're going to go ahead and let's redelete our cookie so that, or actually, this cookie should even be bad now because um, that. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and try to refresh, and it should send us to the login page.
Very cool.
Okay, so that's pretty cool. And then what I want to show is we're going to log in, but we're going to like think about what happens with the flow. So we're going to log in. It left us as a redirect here, so it's going to redirect to the page, and this time it will allow it because we're authenticated. And we saw last week how it lets you passes an authentication flag that file server uses or your app can use.
Hmm.
Um, right? And so then we're going to kind of like get in there and let's look at our index.js now and see what'll happen. It's going to try to run this stuff again. It's going to try to run login, and it should just work because it was like already logged in anyway.
Yes.
So that's fine. But we at that point, what that means is we could leave this code out. Right. I just wanted to show it like a full example of how you do the login in the first place.
If you wanted, yes, I'm tracking what you're saying. Okay. If you
Okay.
know, if you were already logged in but you wanted it to be public, and the goal was to log you in, is that what the line about if the response from login is 200, which means something
Yeah.
like
That
you're
well,
already logged in?
no, that's actually a little bit different. I'll explain it real quick just because it's a useful HTTP thing to know.
Okay.
Like 200 means successful. So this is saying if the status of the result that it returns. So this is just a HTTP endpoint getting function in JavaScript
Oh, does
built
not
in.
equal 200. Okay,
If it
yeah.
does not equal 200, then just stop, and then we'll basically try the password for timluc.
Got it. Okay.
Right, so return just breaks the flow there. Um, and if it does work, it'll say as it does that we're logged in. And now we get to do something kind of cool, which is notice how it prints out that window.ship is Zod, and we didn't know what our ship was at first.
Hmm.
The way it does that is once you're logged in, we can access all of these like landscape, like all these other files that are served through file server but not public.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So we have this one session.js. So basically, I do the same thing here. I use fetch again. This time it's doing a get, and we can actually look at it because we're in our network request. We request session.js. So notice that it requests it, and it does it as a method get, um, and response header content type text JavaScript. So what happens is we get and it should show me here's the response body. So this is what session.js returned us. It returned us this text, this JavaScript text. Window.ship equals Zod.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes.
So it returned that text. I set session code equal to the value of that result, and then I eval it, which is basically take this thing as code and run it. Like for example, I mean I could just eval window. I could just eval something totally different and say window something
Okay.
like that, and now window.ship is actually changed. Okay. So
Okay.
all I'm doing is I'm fetching JavaScript code and then evaluating it. This is all just like all I'm trying to demonstrate here is fun stuff I can do because I'm now logged in because this thing automatically set the cookie when I successfully logged in.
Yes.
Okay, that's all I'm showing. Fun stuff I can do. Then I go ahead and do more fun stuff here, which is I'm logged in, so do ship calls. Okay, so the first thing it does for do ship calls is it logs the value of window.ship right here. Window.ship is Zod.
Mhm.
Okay, then it goes ahead and is actually going to poke Chanel. So now we get to like
There's.
the real meat of it, like the stuff that the people wanted.
Mhm.
So I run. Notice up here, I already set my window.erb object,
Mhm.
and that's an arbitrary name. It could be called anything. Um, very often people will. It really just depends on your particular framework how it handles these kind of things. I basically have one here where I make an API, and all it does is it basically makes a custom object that holds a new channel, and then I have some functions that I run on that.
Okay.
So essentially, the main point here is that this framework has like its own way of handling kind of pieces of global state,
Okay.
and so I work the new channel into there. So whatever your app's way of handling global state is, you can go ahead and just get a new channel into it. So for this one, we're using just a really trivial version of global state, which is we just set a new variable in the window
Okay.
and attach a channel to it. That's all. So now that's accessible for us in like this function because we already defined it up here.
Mhm.
And we're like, okay, go run the poke function. So the poke function looks like this. It takes a ship name, and the ship name is just without sig, an app name, here, Chanel. And so this tells us, once air, basically what's going to happen is air is going to get this poke, and then it's going to go ahead and kind of parse it and pass it on to Gall.
Okay.
Okay, so it goes ahead. So it says we're going to poke it with the window.ship. We're going to do it to Gall app Chanel. Our mark is going to be Chanel action. Okay, so this is the part where the thing here has to be a mark defined in mar.
Marked. Okay. That makes
In the
sense.
mar directory. So
Yes.
the other
Just
way
like
of
a noun poke would have to be.
exactly the other way of saying that is that we're almost into a situation here where this is exactly like poking an app from the dojo.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, with one is there even with the only exception that in the dojo we're able to just write a normal Chanel action here.
But you got to write something that'll be parsed as JSON there in this version, right?
Correct. Okay, so that's the
Okay,
difference. So
this makes
normally
sense.
I would just be able to poke it.
Yep.
In fact, why don't we, and I actually have some pokes like coming in here, but we could just kind of do a preview of the stuff we're going to be doing. This all is like kind of really normal shit that we like, did a lot earlier, which is Chanel action, like, increase. Like, so here we can kind of do it like this, right? We can just do
Mhm.
like the normal syntax and it works. And if I did Chanel debug, we would see the counter be like increased to where it's 143. We had done some stuff. So in this one, we can't do that. We actually have to have it be JSON. And so we need to make sure that whatever mark we're using here can handle a translation from JSON to, you know, to a type.
Yeah, makes sense.
Now, that's kind of nice because it means that we can like directly sanitize our JSON like very strictly right here. And that's all handled by the framework. Can any API framework do this? Yes, computers can all do the same things as each other. It is like useful in practice to have like kind of clearly defined ways for them to do it. And I would say Urbit does a pretty good job of that in kind of setting that whole flow up.
And by sanitize it, you mean it has to fit into what we expect on the Urbit side.
Exactly, so that
Okay.
your Urbit app knows that what's coming in is a valid Chanel action mark.
Such that if somebody tried to use this as an API to post some invalid Chanel action.
Correct. So
Okay.
that helps you with a whole class of things. From it definitely helps with injection attacks, but also mostly it just helps you like with just debugging. Like it just makes sure your data is well formed, and you'll get an error if it's not.
Okay. Yes.
In fact, I mean, we should just probably just let's just make this thing be bad. Um, well, actually, first let's look at what happens because it was good. So because it was good, we do this poke, and then this thing here for a poke function, it expects you to pass two things: a callback function to run if it's successful, and so here we console.log successful poke,
Yeah. Okay.
and a function to run if there's an error. So why don't we make the error happen right now? I'm going to do a few modifications. First, after this first poke, I'm just going to stop execution and return, like terminate the function. Okay,
Okay.
and I'm gonna break the increased counter. So this thing should be invalid now. Like it won't parse in our parser that we made,
Okay.
right? So I need to commit it, and it gets our new index.js. Let's go back and reload, and we should get issues now. All right, so we get window.ship is so we get logged in correctly. Window.ship is Zod correctly. Now it says we try to do this poke, and it's going to fail because it can't parse this thing.
Yes.
And here it is. It actually gives us the Gall error. Poke as cast fail.
That's crazy.
A, Json, B, Chanel action, bad. So we can actually see that like Gall is getting this thing as probably mark JSON and turn it into mark Chanel action.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right. So we can actually kind of get a window into like what Gall is probably doing under the hood.
And then we know that
Which
from
is, which
that
is, which is
Chanel
Gall.
action, it had a bad key.
Exactly. So bad key. So it's actually pretty specific, and it even tells us like which line it fails on, which is Mark Chanel action dot hoon. So if we like pull that up, like line 12. So basically, it's saying that this is where it fails,
Mhm.
which makes sense. And but even better is that it tells us there's a bad key.
Yeah. That's all you
So,
need.
but we don't even only have to have bad keys. Of course, we could also have like bad values, right? So that'll be a bad value because we're expecting something not that. And so again here, logged in, and again, pocus cast fail, key step, key increase counter. So it just recursively goes up, and it doesn't tell us. It basically says, this key had a problem.
Got it.
So, like these, like again, can you do this with any API framework? Like, absolutely. Is it useful to have like your framework having all of this built in and like a coherent way to handle it, and all this logic built in Gall and Air to pass the stuff around and do it? Yeah, it's a pretty big win. Like honestly, front end programming with Urbit is like kind of nice, and I want to do more with it because it handles this stuff like pretty well. So just going back to here. Okay, so we get this stuff. So we get two successful pokes. Both of these, I made them do a successful poke as their callback. This one we again poke Chanel action. We do it as this example thing in the tag union. And on
Okay.
the back end, I actually print out what I get in here just to show that like it does parse it correctly.
Cool. Cool.
So this thing is a legit ship. This thing is a legit set. Like that's all kind of cool.
Yeah.
We're getting so basically we've turned all of these JSON types into Hoon types, and I actually noticed that there's some like recursive stuff going on that we didn't fully look at here. So we look at first here who parses its thing as a ship, right? This like
Right.
Sue makes a parser. Um, we can just quickly look at Sue, but I think we touched on it
We did.
briefly.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is basically it takes a rule and uses it to parse.
Yep.
to parse the JSON, right? So here, basically takes the string and then parses it with the rule. So here we parse this thing as a ship. Message and app are straightforward. And then friends, we actually parse it as an AS. And so AS itself takes a parser.
Right.
So AS takes a parser as its like a JSON parser as its argument in order to parse like an array, the thing into a set, the
Okay.
array into a set.
Yeah.
So what that means, and what that means in practice is that here we passed it an array of strings, and it was able to, because we defined it like that, turn it into a set of ships,
Okay.
which is which is nice. And it'll throw errors if they're not correct ships, so we can do a lot of sanitizing. Now, these things are all passed as Chanel actions. You also can just pass it to the app as JSON, and then potentially the app itself could decide what it wants to do with the JSON.
I think that's what I did in the last thing that we wrote, but this is obvious because we weren't sure how mark and sur file worked, and so
Yeah,
to avoid that issue, but this is way more elegant.
I think it's more elegant. I see both in the code base. I'm not sure whether that's just because of kind of old practices or backwards compatibility, but unless there's a good reason not to, I prefer to make these marks, and I do see them made for a lot of, especially for a lot of Vue apps. They do seem to just make a mark, poke with the thing. It just feels right.
Yeah, it, it
Um,
seems right.
yeah. So here we just go ahead and poke with this random JSON where key one is 9. We log JSON poke on success, and so we get that there. And it goes ahead in here if it gets the thing coming in is where do I dun, 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 JSON. I mean, oh, I see. So it checks the mark right here. If it's a Chanel action mark, then it does handle action right here, right?
Hmm.
And if it's a JSON mark, it extracts the JSON from the vase and just goes ahead and prints it.
Okay, okay,
So it extracts the JSON as JSON.
and
So
that's
here
what's
we get,
happening in that last poke. I track you.
yeah, and notice that this is put into JSON form, right? So we passed it
Oh,
in this
yeah.
form, and it turns it into the Hoon JSON type.
Yep.
So again, quite nice. If because there are some cases where maybe you, for whatever reason, just want JSON coming in, or you have some other thing. It's not exactly a mark. You just have like a function that handles it internally. That's fine. So, final thing we can do is if you want to get information back for a ship, there's two ways. Okay, so one way is we could define an endpoint inside Chanel.hoon using HTTP response as we did last week with using air,
Hmm.
right? And we could basically set up a response that would return some JSON. And so then we would go ahead and we wouldn't even use any of this like poke functionality in channel. We would just fetch the endpoint.
Okay.
Let me see if I don't have that installed. Let me just think if I think we have a gen. We have my info. Let me see if my info is working because I'm gonna yeah, that actually would be a cool. Hmm? Is that because we're like not logged in or something? Oh, that's because I need to log in because I think it was done as private or something like that. I'm not sure. Oh, no. That's not the reason. But whatever, we can log in. That's not the reason. The reason is that we need to serve that endpoint. I'm actually gonna just do something real quick.
Okay.
Remember how last week we like made a generator
Yes.
and we used it to
Yes, I do.
serve? Yeah. I want
I don't remember what I did, but I mean what the generator did. But yes,
the generator just prints out our ship info. So I'm gonna go
that's
ahead
right. Okay.
and serve that one more time. Oh, you don't like me? Oh, is this because?
I mean, I think you're all right. Oh, you're talking about
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I just wanted to I wanted to show that I could basically get JSON from an endpoint using fetch, but now this is annoying because I think it's oh, you know what? I know. You know what? This is actually something that we can update it on the fly, and it has to be updated because um,
Oh, the ox
this
thing.
new this is the thing that's like currently screwing Litmus. And so let me also change it in simple HTTP if it's oh I see. It's just this
What might be
one's
the advantage of a fetch over an interactive posty pokey
yeah,
thing?
that's a good that okay. So we definitely should go into that. So let me commit this. We're serving the thing. Yeah, there we go. So we could let's actually just like go ahead and get this. Um, Actually, you know what we can we do await fetch. Um, oh yeah, that definitely works. Um, there we go. So we basically just went ahead and fetched that from the thing, right? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
I wonder if I can. No, it doesn't. I don't know. Well, what I would do is, I think I can await the whole thing. How did I do the one at the top? Await. Oh, res equals await. Yeah, so I just haven't done much like async, so the syntax is getting to me. Okay. Hmm? Oh, stream is locked because I need to. Hmm. Oh, it doesn't. Okay, okay. I'm surprised that doesn't work. Anyway, leaving it aside, we can get JSON, and if my stuff wasn't messed up, we could like potentially parse it.
Mm-hmm.
It might be because I need to do like JSON. Wait, big. Can you do JSON.parse? There we go. Huh. So
You did it.
basically, what I did there is I fetched it from our urban endpoint,
Mm-hmm.
put it in a variable, and then like parsed it. So now it's JavaScript. So point being, I can essentially serve JavaScript from a dynamic endpoint on my ship, and we also saw that we don't just have to use generators. We can also do that with dynamic endpoints, like we saw last week, right?
Is
So your
JSON
question
not
is,
JavaScript?
yeah, it's a little bit. It's like used in JavaScript, but it has to be like parsed into JavaScript.
Okay. Sorry.
I'm not sure what it is. Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure what it is in this format that JavaScript is choking on because this all seems fine, but yeah, it doesn't like something there.
Okay.
Um, so, your question was basically like the obvious one of why do you want to when do you want to use that over poking?
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay, two answers. One is that poking generally is just like a one-way street for data. I need to check if you can return data from it, but it's not usually done. So usually it's just to like have your app do something, but not to get a value back right away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's one reason. But there is another way to get data, which is you can subscribe to the window. So we're subscribed to Chanel
Right.
on Chanel's example path, which is right here, right?
And that's what prints the God
Um,
example subscription in the dojo when you were refreshing that, right?
yes, exactly. So here it takes a couple of functions. One is if there's an error doing the subscription, this is a function to handle that. Then again, when it gets data back, whenever it gets data from the subscription. So this is where channel is really doing the most work because it sets up something that's listening constantly. And whenever it gets a response, it's gonna like run this. Okay, and
Yep.
then if the subscription ends, it runs this. So the reason I have this whole thing like up here is we're going to type a message, um, but we're gonna like format things correctly.
Oh.
Send data to subscription. So this, if we look at this button, what it does, where did I like wire that up? Let's look at index.html because that's where it's wired up. So button on click, send sub data, get the value of the message element. So we have a text input type with message and it gets its value. This is really like kind of low level HTML JavaScript, but you've probably seen some stuff like
Mm-hmm.
this.
Mm-hmm.
Just really, really basic hacky stuff. Um, so all that this button does is when you click it, it yanks the value that's in that text and it runs the send sub data function, which is right here. It just takes some message. and then it goes ahead and pokes us. Okay, so this is the alternate flow if you don't use endpoints, is you poke your ship, do some stuff inside there, and then to get data back to the client, you pass the data on the subscription path.
That's that's what we were doing for the app. I don't think we were even subscribed. I think we had an arm that sent a poke to, was it air? Sent a poke to air to send a JSON object back up to the application, which is like the stupidest possible way of doing this. So this is very interesting to see these other cases that are much better uses of the application space. Does that make sense? Like having a poke and a
Yeah,
subscription back. Our way was just like hacky as crap.
yeah. So the usual way that this can then be done is you can have some like global store that
Hmm.
all parts of your app listen to, and whenever you get a message on the path, they can just check whether it's relevant to their component.
Okay. Yeah.
Right, you could have all these different components inside your app that are all listening to your global store for diffs, and if the
Hmm.
diff is like applicable to them, then they do something.
Hmm.
That's a decent enough model, probably one that I'll use. Or you could have a declared endpoint, and your component doesn't have to know about any global store, and it just hits that endpoint and gets the JSON back. Those
Yeah.
are the two options.
Okay.
So this one, when we poke it with on example, we poke it on example with our message. That's all just gonna flow through the normal way.
Hmm.
It finds out that it's an example, so it goes ahead and prints out the action, and then just like returns the state. Um, Now, oh, I'm sorry, it's not using. I'm sorry, that's not right. It's the action is not example. It's send sub data. So it parses it as send sub data. It returns the state, but it also is going to do a like subscription update card, like a give card.
Okay. Okay. A gift. Yes. Yes. I see what
Yeah.
you're saying.
So I
Sorry.
I actually pass the path here manually
Hmm.
as like example. And actually, let's just see just real quick how that's parsed. To parse a path in this, we do pod dgest, and it just takes a string and parses it as a Hoon path.
So you could
So
make
it
that
just
as
takes
long
it.
as you
It
wanted
just
to.
exactly. This could be any arbitrary like Hoon path.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. We choose the one that actually has a subscription associated with it because we subscribed on it right here.
Right.
And we do all this, and then at the end of the day, it takes our it makes some like JSON with our message and passes it back and gives that on the path.
Hmm.
So then this bad boy gets it on the back end. So like because it's subscribed to the example path, it gets it in here, and it's just going to log got response data. So let's
Right.
look at what that looks like. I say hi
That's
Rabseth
actually
Bikram,
good.
send it, got response, which is this string.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, because the data is like the JSON object is just a string, right? So it just like turns it into JSON um, for the front end. Whatever the JSON object is, it'll turn into the proper JSON, pass it to data, and you're done.
Interesting.
Now, let's be clear. This is almost always done. This path, just by convention, is usually called primary. And you would, in practice, you would never have this code here um, telling it what path to do. You would just poke with some action, and then if the app had something it needed to send back to you as a result of that poke, it would just send it back on primary, and you would have been listening to primary right here.
Okay. Just
So the
by
normal
convention.
by convention, you make the subscription path right here be primary. You subscribe to primary. You set up a function that can handle anything that primary can send from the app, and you call it a day.
Are there like secondary ones for like if you have a tile and then a full screen application or something, or have you seen anything other than primary?
I haven't looked too hard for it.
All
I'm
right.
sure I can find some example if I look, but I mean, generally speaking, for one like front end, you would want to just have one primary, and then if it had different types of messages it was receiving, you would just separate those by some like essentially like key that they had.
It just seems odd to have something called primary if there's nothing that's non-primary. You know what I mean? That's like
I think it's
I'm number
yeah. I
one
mean, I
in a
think that
race of one person.
yeah. I mean, I think it's you could have secondary. I guess I just don't really see a lot of purpose. Here's an example of I want to an example of someone having API ship like I think it's just going to be inside JS API.js. Um, yeah, so he basically is like yeah he does a subscribe here to his ship on the path. We have like event um, success data event and from ship path. So he has a success. So it gets this, whatever the data is from primary, and then calls this success function that he has somewhere. Oh, right, fine. Mm, this is more. When did other? Oh, I see. Right. Okay, so he has a little bit of indirection going here. Um, but basically, by when he gets data coming back on that primary, he knows that it's going to be like some kind of like record or deck in his thing,
Yeah.
and he runs this function on it. I think mine is actually a little bit like kind of clearer to see, but and I've seen some other examples as well. But essentially, you can pass back any JSON here, and so it's like a good idea often to be passing it back as like maybe like either like you like diff or something like that if it's a diff or like value or whatever you have, and then you can do some just like logic to check what the key is to decide what you want to do with it.
Would you handle the diff in the JS side, or you'd be
Yeah, this
sending?
is all this is all JS side. So you send it, and then basically the JS is responsible for figuring out what this message means and which
Got it.
components it's applicable to.
Yeah, our way of doing like literally in the application that Nick and I built, we were just I just doxed him by his dead name. Uh,
Yeah.
we uh, we were literally just using like a poke to the application to create a card to give a fact back on the path of a JSON
Hmm.
object, and so it just made this like loop. But this other way of handling it is far superior. I mean, I understand that this is kind of happening in the same way here, where if it gets a poke
It's
of a
the same.
sense,
It's the same thing, but the implementation details do matter.
right?
So the way I think of it is like you just poke, and that's kind of like a black box, or
Mm-hmm.
you it could do something, and then your subscription handles any like results that spits out, which is
That's such a better
actually
way.
like yeah. I mean, honestly, it's very similar to the way Gall handles things. At that point, you're almost doing like pokes and cards.
I hadn't thought about that. And then a fetch
Um,
is like a sort of an on, maybe even a scry, closer to a scry.
Yeah, fetch is closer to a scry, and that's probably the best way to think about it.
Huh.
And so you could just implement that in the same way that you don't need to have like, just directly scry. You could do it through a poke and have the poke scry.
Right.
But
Right.
it really depends. It really depends on your app and what's cleanest. And I see all of it being used. For example, chat view it does a like it uses the on watch to get all of like the subscription, just get the initial chats, but then if you scroll up and it needs to like load some earlier messages, it does a fetch for that.
If it's working on that particular occasion.
Yeah, well, that too. It's gotten better and better such that I can like more confidently say what it is doing.
Right. Okay.
um, but yeah, that's what it does.
Okay.
um all right, I think that's pretty much all of it. We've looked at everything. We looked at even like debugging and how you can use the developer tools to poke around. Mostly you're going to be in the console, but you know it can be useful to look at these headers sometimes to figure out some stuff that's going on. And then for Gall 201, my final thing to write actually is just like kind of a simple walkthrough of doing an actual app, and integrating this in an actual front end framework.
Enjoy. And are you gonna do Svelte, or have you decided yet?
I am. I'm enjoying it. I like it. It's a legit option. And then if people want to see, React, there's plenty of examples of Urbit React apps.
Yeah, I think it's also like you say. I think it's cool to diverge from that to show that this thing isn't a one. I don't like the
One
expression one
trick
trick
pony.
pony, but yeah, because like how many tricks are ponies pulling? But whatever. Um,
Yeah, exactly. So I think yeah, I like the idea of like you go to your launch and like it has all this I should quickly document when I do. I should like document launch, but the launch is very easy and well done now.
and can you get to applications you make through the Leap thing? Is that what you're talking about? You're talking about the controlled
Yeah,
fast.
yeah, yeah, and it's oh, that's a good question. Does launch expose all of those? I don't know that it does. They should make it so that it does. That would actually be really sweet.
Well, there must be some way of pushing
Hooking
to
into
it. Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, that's actually they probably if they don't have it, they probably will soon. So I would plan on it as if you'll soon be able to fire up your own ones from like fast.
That would be really cool.
Yeah, yeah, I like the idea of just these random apps sitting there in launch that people use. So I want to quickly make that like a reality. Um, all right. Anything else?
Okay. Have you thought anything about, or have you thought at all about software distribution? And I know that that's a problem that Tlon wants to
Yeah.
solve, but
Yeah. Yes, and I don't have a good answer yet. And like a lot of it is at this place of like figuring out how to handle, bad Gall apps or stuff there. But I mean, I'm like little Wolfer is playing with it.
mm,
And I mean, my answer at this point would be like, oh, he's already unearthed one critical issue by us seeing Litmus's issues just with like this minor divergence. So first thing up is to kind of handle that issue and then onward and upward. But it's going to be this very like I think like kind of iterative, janky process for a bit until everyone gets the intuitions of what's going on.
well, that stands to reason. I mean, we're still in the infancy of this thing. I just think that's
Yeah,
going to be
so
a big
that's
one.
it's going to be big and like there's a lot of kind of aspects to it and stuff that has to be done, but it definitely needs to improve. But fortunately, I think there's enough work to be done on getting people comfortable just with making front end apps. And there's a lot that can be done to expedite that. So at least those can happen somewhat in parallel.
One more question for you before we go then. You've
Yeah.
seen a lot of talk about this is sort of tangential. Well, it's not even tangential. It's orthogonal to what we're doing, I guess. But you've seen a lot of talk about this Ethereum cost and the results of that. I saw your proposal and that you've been kind of
I,
communicating with it.
I withdrew it because I think there's some other aspects to address and
Sure.
stuff, but I have thoughts. Should we stop like broadcasting here? Or does it
Well,
relate
no,
to
I
this?
want this on the tape because my thing
Oh,
is
okay,
just
okay, good.
how concerned are you about solving this problem for the viability of Urbit?
Yeah. Uh, am I concerned in the sense that I think it's like super hard to solve? No.
Okay.
Am I concerned in the sense that like it has to get solved and like people need to like approach the discussion more productively and less autistically? Like, yes. I'm concerned there, and like crypto just like has a way, even in like otherwise extremely articulate and well reasoned people, just bringing out big levels of autism.
Okay.
So it's yeah. I think Orbit will be fine. There's good ways to handle it, but like yeah, they do actually have to get done. So I think the process has unearthed. I can send you off band a like just thing I have that like I was about to send as a response, but I actually did change my thoughts and I haven't like sent them yet.
Yeah.
So I can just like send over to you, but like that's kind of where I think WICDEF has valid points.
Cool.
Regarding the idea of how to coordinate minority and to let them like kind of continue down a certain property lineage.
Mhm.
Meaning like there's this history of what's been transferred where, and letting people directly continue from that can be useful. So I get where he's coming from there. I think there's just ETH does impose some big costs, and I think things like optimistic rollups also do too. So there's yeah,
Yeah, I don't like
there's a
the
lot to go
idea of the
there.
rollups for some reason. I think it's yeah. Anyway, we don't have to talk about it. But that's good that you still think that there's viability here.
Oh, there's a ton of viability. It's all really doable. It's just like you have to know what you're solving for, and so I think they finally kind of unearthed what they're solving for,
Okay, cool.
or we have. I mean, it is like pretty much a community effort. Like I think it would be a mistake in some ways to like just have it driven by just by Wicdev or Ralphus, and that's not going to happen because they're kind of at loggerheads. But that there is I don't know that they particularly like anyone particularly has like amazing expertise here, except some of the outside people who have posted, like Clint. So, given that, I mean, I think it's very much if anyone has legit ideas, it's fair game. But in terms of optimistic rollups, my main issue is that the advantage of just being on pure ETH is that you have like a very clear way to maintain kind of a lineage over time, like of like me basically
Right.
being like we are the true faith who follows this initial ETH contract, and everyone else is a heretic, even if there's only 10% of us.
Hell
That's
yeah.
I get the appeal of that. That's cool. The problem with optimistic rollups is that you have to start deciding, which bad state you restore from if there was ever a bad state, and you don't get that kind of like just automatic moral clarity. You
Mhm.
do get significantly lowered costs, which you get in a lot of the other versions as well. But yeah,
Well, the big
so
takeaway for me here is I want to go now and look up the etymology of loggerheads because I've never thought about it before, but now I don't know why it means what it means. So that's
I thought
great.
of that as I thought of that as I was like saying it. It didn't make any sense to me either. But
Well, we'll find
wait,
out.
yeah, law. I can't let people see me like googling stuff. I have to